Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Smart Cities Start Here, Streamlining Fleet, Facilities, and More for Government Efficiency, presented by AssetWorks. I'm Nicole Osinski, Executive Editor for Government Fleet, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. I encourage you to ask questions during the webinar at any point, and we'll try to address them all. However, if you do not get yours answered, don't worry, we will be contacting you via email with a response after the event. Today, I'm joined by our speaker, Mario Guzman, Customer Success Manager with AssetWorks. Mario, thank you for joining us. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you'll be talking about today?
Thank you for having me. My name is Mario Guzman, recently with AssetWorks as a Customer Success Manager. So I get to serve fleets at a greater capacity, just helping everyone out. A little bit about me, have about over 20 years in government fleet operations. Government operations for that matter. Way back when in my career, started out as a technician and was fortunate and had the opportunities to move up into managerial roles and then into executive management, was the director of support services, which managed fleet and facilities, and also was the director of public works, managing fleet, facilities, capital improvements, roads, parks, and all that. So I wish to bring that knowledge to AssetWorks and to everyone here at the webinar and help people use data to leverage and become a smart city. And as you can see, a little bit of my background, and let's get right into it. Okay, today's agenda. We'll be discussing what is a smart city, the elements driving a smart city initiatives, challenges of government operations, key inefficiencies that agency face, strategies for streamlined operations and better resource management. Aside from that, we'll be talking about technology's role in this transformation, how an enterprise asset management tools can empower smart decisions and enhance business continuity, and then increasing efficiencies and using this information and data for forward plans and capital improvements. Okay, and we'll get into the tactics as we move forward. Okay, so let's understand a smart city. Why are smart cities? What makes a city smart? 70% of the world's population will live in urban areas by 2050. And if you're in a government space, it's great to have that tax base and that tax revenue. And depending on where you're at and which geographical location, a lot of cities encourage more development, either through housing or either through mixed commercial use, or maybe different housing, different condos and things of that nature. They warrant that. They want that because that brings that tax revenue to bring additional services to the residents. But a lot of times there's a cost to that growth. So what are you doing as a government agency to accommodate and make sure you're in a good position to let your executive management know, hey, listen, this is great that we're growing. However, there's a cost to that between people, more garbage services, more road services. Now that you have more residents and you're growing, they might want to use more city services such as parks. And if you have a fleet, you need the vehicles to provide those services. So that's going to have an impact as well. And governments lose trillions annually due to inefficiencies of asset management. You see, if they don't have a hold on that, there's a lot of redundancies within the system that causes issues. So what defines a smart city? For the purpose of this webinar, we'll break it down to 3 different categories. Connected infrastructure, that's integrated systems. Everyone talking to one another because everyone's connected to a certain extent within a city. The fleet department provides vehicles to the police department. The police department rides on the roads that are serviced by the roads department, so on and so forth. And also making data-driven decision-making. Make sure you're using data to make decisions. In the government space, there's a political element, and there's also an emotional element. We've always done it this way. I feel that this is right. And while that's all great, and they play a role in decisions, you definitely want to have data and empirical evidence to make your decisions. And of course, sustainable energy use, adopting energy efficient technologies to minimize the environmental impact. So let's talk about some of these hurdles. What common challenges do government agencies face? fragmented data systems. If you're not collecting the data and you're not articulating this data to make your decisions, it's definitely going to hinder the collection, the analysis, and the sharing of data between departments. So you have these inherent silos between departments where they're not talking to each other. And sometimes in government agencies, as you have these budgets, it's just much easier to look at the budget, increase it by 3-4%, or cut some services here. But many times it's easier to do that as opposed to just going back almost to a zero-based budget and look at the data, and does the data justify the need for a certain line item? I'm always been the one, whenever I had a budget, definitely try to budget and plan for it accordingly and have the true cost, so that you're not at the end of the year trying to balance the numbers, robbing Peter to pay Paul behind the scenes. And when you don't have this data, it causes slower decision making and resource mismanagement. A lot of missed opportunity costs is what I like to call it, where you have people doing a lot of manual entry and a lot of busy work, but are they really being productive? And I call that an opportunity cost. And then you have a perceived need as opposed to fact-based decisions. And that's basically, and you can have a room full of smart people. And if you're in that space, you get a little bit of groupthink because, we've always done it that way. And you've almost convinced yourself that this is the actual need. And that may be the case, but do you have the data to back that up? And that's tied to operational costs and budget. So you have rising costs of aging infrastructure and vehicles. You have higher maintenance costs of assets. You have budget constraints. Depending where you are, sometimes you're asked to do less with more. I always argue you do less with less. But what information are you bringing to justify that? And improper planning, where you now have a reactive culture. And that's probably the most dangerous one, because you're not planning things correctly. You're not using your data. You're not using your information. And now these fires are coming up, right? And as these fires come up, you, as the administrator, as the person resolving these issues, take care of them. And then sometimes that appears as a win because, hey, there's an issue. We went, we fixed it. We're the heroes. I'd almost question, are you constantly putting out fires? Because if you're constantly putting out fires, then there's a maintenance issue. Sometimes that doesn't get seen because as we have our hard workers that take care of the issues and problems, everyone wants to pat them on the back, which is rightfully earned because they took care of an issue. I always equate it to, are you firefighting or are you in fire prevention? Firefighting is fun because you're taking care of issues and you're resolving issues and it's right there. There's a problem, you fix it and it feels good. However, I would argue you're better off with fire prevention. And that's just a mindset of making sure you're using a lot of more preventative maintenance and using data to make decisions, especially from a capital replacement improvement perspective. Some other challenges: maintaining compliance and reporting. How many times have you come into an organization where the contract was held at legal, the purchase order was held at the purchasing department, the invoices were at the finance department, and any kind of work related to that may be at the actual user department. So now you have information that's just all over the place, truthfully. And with stringent compliance and regulations, depending on your agency, you have to meet these reporting standards for audits and regulatory mandates. And also, outdated processes increase errors, jeopardizing compliance. Non-compliance can disrupt operations and hurt the public trust. If you don't have a preventative, for example, on school buses, depending where you're at, you have to have a monthly inspection. And if you can't track that and you can't prove that you've done it, then you didn't do it. And that definitely breaks public trust. And also in some instances, you have one person that's been there for quite a amount of time and they, whether intentionally or not, have all the information. So there's no information sharing. And now you have a single point of failure. If that person is no longer there, if they hit the lotto, then all that data and knowledge goes with them. I spoke about it earlier. A lot of manual input. Depending on the agency you go to, I love Excel, but if you're constantly using Excel, to me, sometimes that's an indicator if that process can be automated. And going back to what I said about a reactive mindset, now you can't track maintenance. You don't have the proper maintenance being done. You miss deadlines, increase downtime, hinder decision making because you're constantly putting out fires. And then you also have to account for downtime and the cost for that. Because now you have the downtime and now you either have to rent the piece of equipment or contract something out. And if you don't have a contract in place, now you have to use the resources with the finance department or with the procurement department. So again, another lost opportunity cost. And I also like to say, going back to my point I said earlier about information being scattered throughout the department, as you bring people on board and we talk about succession planning, and succession planning is a lot of times referred back to the individual, who's next in line to fill that role, which is very, very true. But from an organization, what are you doing to ensure succession planning as today's job market, a lot of this up and coming generation may leave. And when they leave, they take information and knowledge with them. So do you have that repository of information? So when you do have succession planning, that the information is there readily available. So you don't have to track down the finance department or track down the procurement department or track down the legal department for all those documents. So in comes enterprise asset management software in smart cities. So what's the purpose of fleet and EAM software? And how can fleet and EAM software overcome these challenges? We'll get right into it. Because information and the people you have go hand in hand to have a smart city. As I noted earlier, I think the number one thing is a repository of information. You can track assets, users, budgets, purchase orders, permits, capital costs, acquisition cost, emergency. You can use it for emergency management and documentation. And also, if you want to get grants or any kind of state appropriations, this is where the data helps. And I know with government fleet, there's a fleet background, but I've always been of the mindset, if it's a vehicle, if it's a building, if it's a street, if it's a park, it's an asset. It's a depreciating asset in many instances that requires maintenance, requires services, requires labor. So are you tracking that information? Do you know how much has been spent on a vehicle to affect its life cycle cost? How much was spent on fuel? How much was spent on maintenance? How much was spent on recalls? How much was spent on outside repairs? Let's take that same philosophy and apply it to buildings. You had elevator repairs or roof repairs. Do you have the contract for that? Do you have the permits for that? What methodology was used to acquire it? Was it an emergency purchase order because it broke down, or was it a normal maintenance agreement? And this is where the enterprise asset management software really helps you out in becoming a smart city, because now this takes the searching aspect out of it because it's all housed under one location. Depending where you're at, in many instances, I can tell you for the state of Florida, sometimes some cities will ask for state funding for state appropriations, and you have to have the information readily available, your data, to justify the need for anything. So if I'm going to go to the state to ask for funding to pave a major corridor within the city that ties the county and multiple agencies, do I have the information to back up why that's needed? Do I have the information to back up why not only is it needed, but why that dollar amount is needed to repair those items? As I said earlier, the data tells your story. Maintenance management is probably one of the most obvious ones that helps you become a smart city. You can monitor and manage all activities, repairs, preventative maintenance. And then as you track this information, you can trend it and start using some predictive analytics. Again, be it a vehicle, be it a building, you can track how many people use this facility, street, vehicle count, how many paving projects or potholes you have on a certain street. This is all the data that's being collected that helps you become a smart city and make data-based decisions. Of course, there's expense and cost tracking. You can track the cost of assets, compare and contrast, and evaluate asset usage. Let's talk about that compare and contrast a little bit. Which vehicle best meets your needs? Well, now, if you have the information and you can track and trend the information over 3 years per se, you can look at real-time fuel usage and also look at, how much does vehicle A cost me a year compared to vehicle B? Or perhaps we've spent a lot of money on a library. Now, why is that? Is it because it's low maintenance, or is it because it's high usage? And if it's high usage, then we need to increase the maintenance on that. So that's just an example of expense and cost tracking. And I alluded to it a little bit earlier. You can use this for life cycle costs, and that's probably one of the second to the repository of information. Life cycle costs is what really brings it home for me. You can use this data to enhance capital improvement planning from a fleet, streets, and parks perspective. So fleet, of course, life cycle cost. What was the initial capital cost of the asset? How much has it cost to maintain the asset? How much fuel has this unit used? And then if you do sell that asset at the end of its life cycle, how much did you retain to get that cost of that vehicle? And even prior to selling it, at what point does it not make sense to put money into a vehicle? This is the kind of information that helps you make those decisions, tracking that information. And it's different for every government agency. Some agencies get rid of vehicles 80,000 miles, 100,000 miles. If you're in a rental agency, 30, 40,000, that's an old vehicle. So again, tracking that information from a fleet perspective, knowing the capital cost, maintenance cost, fuel cost, and knowing at what point is it not worth to put more money into the vehicle. Let's talk about a building. Every building has costs as well, from roofs to, I'm down in South Florida, AC units. But if you're up north, boiler units. We have hurricanes down here, so we have to be in compliance with emergency, impact windows and things that provide safety during hurricanes. But at what point have you put so much money into a building where after you conduct a facility condition index, it might be worth to have a new building? It would be cheaper to build a new building and have that structure, and the ROI will be within 5 years because you're not using as much water, as much electricity, and as much services to keep that building up to par. Now, if you go back to your administration and say, hey, listen, we need a new building, you might get laughed at. So you have to provide this data and provide this information. Asking for a new building, that's a big ask. But if you can articulate and show, hey, look how much we have been spending every single year on this building. Look at the environmental impact we've had by having this building. Look how much water consumption, electric consumption, and how we have been increasing our carbon footprint. Now that is how you make your point. Streets, let's talk about streets. Are you constantly grading and milling and paving? When was the last time you had a geotechnical to check if your base is good? Again, data points, information to provide. And parks, is it a highly utilized park or is it a low utilized park? Are you tracking the repairs and assets or damage after a party or after any kind of event? Again, all this information, all these data points, and we'll get more into it later on. So, EAM, centralized data management. When I could, I like to take the thinking out of things and have things automated. And I like to have the true cost of the asset. Many times, like I said, people may have a perception or a thought or an emotion because that's how we've done it. That's how things have always been happening. But I've always argued and encouraged people to look at, hey, what is this actually costing? As I spoke about earlier, fleet, labor, parts, fuel, outside repairs. For facilities, your labor, your material, your sublet repairs, any kind of regulatory items tied to a facility. Regarding fire life safety, you have sprinklers. That has to be monitored every single year. So it's important to have this data point of, hey, this is our compliance. We inspected it once a quarter as per the standards. Depending where you're at, I know in cities where I've worked at, you have fire marshals that conduct inspections on buildings, and you have a finite amount of time to have that inspection completed. And wouldn't it be nice to say, hey, listen, these are all the inspections that were done. This is our information over the last 4 years and how we've kept that information. I know I'm talking about fleet, facilities, parks, streets, but these are like the core and essential operational functions of a government agency, and how they're all intertwined together and how they all make a smart city to make better data-based decisions. Road conditions, road condition assessments. You can track a road, either have it a rating from 90 to 99, 80 to 89, or some agencies use a letter function, an A road, a B road, a C road. You know, what is your game plan? What is your trajectory to pave these roads? If you have to ask for information, what data are you bringing? Hey, we need to pave this particular neighborhood. Or perhaps maybe you have an elected official that just got into office and wants to pave this particular area. You're able to show information and say, listen, I know we want to get that area. However, based off our data, this is what we have to pave because we have base problems here. We can no longer just mill and grade and pave on it. And if we don't do it that way, we'll be spending more taxpayer dollars and being reactive. And one of the things that I love about having a great EAM system, depending on what size of a project you have going on, if it's a paving project, I can speak for South Florida. You have to account for drainage. So what is everything that's tied into that paving project? You know how much the paving cost. You have the contractors that did the work. You have the work that was done for your drainage, any kind of signs that were put up, any kind of pavement markings. Again, this is a repository of information that's at your fingertips. And this information, it's out there, but now you know the cost of it. Now you can track how long it took. So when you have a future project going on, you have a better idea of how long that project takes and what the actual cost is. So you're not going into a meeting blind. And these are the components and facets that make a smart city a smart city. And let's talk about that. What is a city? A city is not a living organism. A city is basically employees, people, you know, all very passionate about public service or maybe a private sector. So are we giving our people the tools to make them successful? Because that's what really makes a smart city. A city doesn't just wake up one day and it's smart. No, it's the people. Are you empowering the people to give them the tools to succeed? And separate and apart from that, are you creating a culture where everyone's always thinking out of the box and challenging the status quo and using data and information to make these decisions? Spoke about it before, repository information, your permits, your purchase orders, your invoices can all be housed in an enterprise asset management system to make you smarter. And I spoke about it earlier. Whenever I see Excel or anything manual, I always think, hey, can things be automated? Aside from the convenience and the greater efficiencies gained by things being automated, for example, fleet PMs, facilities PMs, fire life safety compliance, child care inspections, bridge inspections, stormwater compliance, depending where you're at, you have to have streets swept at a certain interval in order to be compliant with stormwater. This automation takes away from manual entry, manual input, or physically putting that information in. Because now, think about it. If you have staff dedicated solely to contacting departments for PMs or reaching out for facilities or tracking all this information when it could be automated, you're losing out on opportunity cost. Whether it be a private sector or a government sector, sometimes you're challenged with so many different issues and problems that just arise throughout the day. I like to preserve as much brain capital as possible. So how do you conserve that? Because there is decision-making fatigue. If you're constantly making decisions, if you're constantly doing the manual entry, the manual input, when we need that precious brain power to make the big decisions, to fight certain battles, you might be expended because you used it all on fleet PMs, facilities PM, life cycles, life safety compliance, childcare inspections, monitoring bridge inspections. Having these things automated, or at least the contact to reach out to the employees to have these things automated, takes the thinking out of it. And you can preserve that brain capital, and it can be used when you really have these issues that are coming around. And one of the things I always, I love to celebrate successes, and I love to celebrate the teams, and I love to encourage people, and I love to tell the story of how successful my department is. And I would argue anyone that's on this webinar, hey, do your employees do a great job? And I'm pretty sure 99.99% everyone's gonna say, no, my team is great, they're phenomenal. And then my follow-up question is, can you prove it? Do you have the empirical quantitative data to say, you know what, my team is doing a great job? And this is where the data helps become a smart city, because it brings a level of accountability. Are you showing how productive you are? Are you tracking your work order completion, your turnaround time, your downtime? And again, let's talk about productivity. Let's talk about work order completion. Let's talk about turnaround time and downtime. We all know what those mean, but those can be applied fleet, facilities, parks, streets, engineering projects, solid waste aspects, all tie together. And these are just examples of what you can use. So when someone says, hey, how's your team doing? Oh, they're doing phenomenal. We have closed 3,000 work orders at the end of the month. I think about 3,500 work orders came in and we completed them. We have a turnaround time that averages anywhere from 27 to 32 hours, depending on type of equipment. These are hard facts and data that you can tell people. I'm going to talk to my fleet folks. How many times do you not have a vehicle that comes in and you might have a user department saying, hey, that vehicle's been here for 2 weeks. What's going on? And then when you look at the information, no, it hasn't been here for 2 weeks. It's been here for about 3 or 4 days. That's using that information. So it definitely having a good system in place definitely helps you become more accountable, you and your team accountable. And if you notice there are some flaws, I'm always quick to say, okay, if we have low productivity or if something is not being turned around in a quick manner, that just raises a light on the subject to say, hey, what's going on? Is more training needed? Do the team members have the tools needed to help support the mission, or what exactly is happening? And separate and apart from that, once you start getting your information and tracking this information, be it how many roads you paved, how many services you're doing from a parks perspective, how many vehicles you're repairing, inspections for whatever. Once you have this information, I joke around with a lot of team members, and we talk about playing offense. I like to play offense. So before somebody asks me for the information, now you have information, you can start giving it to everyone. Number one, that empowers your customers because now they are part of the decision-making process. Number two, you're being transparent. So maybe your work order turnaround isn't where it needs to be. That's okay. You're being upfront and honest, showing them, hey, listen, it's not where it needs to be. We are working on it. Or use that same information to say, hey, listen, look at our work order turnaround time. We need more resources. We need more human capital. We need more employees. We need more tools. Again, data is just a snapshot. It's about using that data and information to tell your story. So tracking. I like to talk about the what, the how, and the why. Depending on which system you use, so many systems out there are robust. What are you going to track? First of all, what is your story? What are you trying to tell? And what? What are you trying to tell? What data points? Are you tracking street usage? Are you tracking energy costs in a building? Are you tracking facility usage in a bathroom? Are you tracking vehicle cost? What is it that you're tracking? And provide those benefits to your administration. So for example, productivity, cost, completion, downtime. What are you tracking? Then it lies the action plan. How are you tracking this? What systems are in place to capture the data? For most agencies, the number one thing is probably your frontline employees. That's where the information starts flowing in. So do you have a system in place? Is there an environment where employees are allowed to input into the system? Do they have that mindset? Because with technology, and that's probably the biggest challenge, is getting your team members to buy into it and start using the tablet, start using the phone. And through attrition, I think the up and coming generation definitely is more technology savvy. But still, how do you encourage the team members that are currently on board? And probably one of the more tedious tasks is coding and putting your information in place, using either NAFA codes or different repair class codes. How are you painting this picture? So when you track the information, you can pull it up pretty quick. So for example, I always have a specific code when it came to hurricanes or emergency services. Because we had to go to the federal government to get FEMA reimbursements, and in the heat of the moment, you're making these decisions because you have a storm coming and everything is happening. But when things die down, do you have the documentation of how much labor, how much material, how much was spent, how much did the city spend, and is trying to get reimbursed by the federal government? I can tell you there are agencies that I know of that had to actually pay back the federal government because their information was not intact. So again, that goes back to how are you tracking this information? If there's, like I said, if there's an emergency, I have a certain code for hurricanes. If it's a compliance, how are you coding that information? So on and so forth. And then probably the most important thing, why? Why is this story important? And how do you equate this to dollars or to people? How do you get the funding for vehicles? We need more vehicles. Okay, you have to compete with the fire department, police department, parks department when you're making your ask. But if you can tell your story, hey, look how much we spent. I know we don't have any capital for vehicles. However, we spent $4 million in maintenance. If we were to get new vehicles and spend, let's say, a fraction of that, $600,000, we could significantly affect our maintenance numbers. And keep in mind, you're not speaking of the downtime that this high maintenance vehicles have caused. Look how much overtime or look how much outside repairs we had to spend in an effort to keep up with these antiquated vehicles. That's the kind of story you want to tell. Make it back into dollars and cents, because when it comes to budget time, you're competing with everyone else. But do you have the information to back up your information, and then also take that information and give it to your executive team so they know, hey, look, this benefits me. X dollars, X cents. If you're in a public space, hey, these are taxpayer dollars. If you're in a private sector, hey, look how much we can save or potential revenue. As I spoke earlier about it, one of the big ones, asset lifecycle management. Inefficient asset utilization and aging infrastructure. That's happening throughout every government agency. So how are you staying ahead of the curve? How are you minimizing streets from having continuous potholes? How are you minimizing vehicles from constantly breaking down? Garbage truck, if it's out of commission, you cannot take the garbage out. How do you ensure that we have the right fire apparatus to help save lives? How are you making sure that we have facilities that are in good working condition so that you can conduct business in them? Again, tracking the assets from acquisition to disposal. Ensuring that you're utilizing the asset. Again, maybe we have a building that you're paying water bills, you're paying all this electric, you're paying all these fees, and the building is not used that much. Okay, yet you have another agency that's looking to buy a new building. Hey, maybe we can house them over here. Or depending how large your fleet is, how many times have you seen a low utilized asset? I call them lunch mobiles. They're parked in every single department, and they're just in case mobiles. Just in case I need to use the vehicle, we like to have our vehicle here. And that sounds good, and that feels pretty good. But in the reality, what is that vehicle? It's a depreciating asset that's only being driven 800 miles a year. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make financial sense to have that vehicle. This is the information you want to convey from an asset lifecycle management. You look at projects, facility upgrades. Is it worth it? At what time? When do we need to replace the roof? Do you replace it when it starts leaking? Or do you replace it when it starts leaking at year 30? Or would it be more sound to say, hey, look how much we spent over the past years. At year 27, let's replace that roof. Again, geographically, I'm down in South Florida. ACs have a life cycle. And if an AC or a chiller unit goes down in the building, you can't work there. And think about the disruption of services when you don't have ACs, your AC working or your chiller plant working in a building. Massive disruption. Why replace it at year 15 after it breaks down? And keep in mind, now you have a 6 to 8 month lead time, depending on the equipment, and you have that building down. Again, using this information from an asset lifecycle management perspective. Look how much it's costing to maintain this building. Look how much it's costing to maintain the AC. The life cycle for this is, for argument's sake, 15 years. We are at year 11. Let's start doing the rebuild now. Let's plan ahead of time. It's much easier to plan and account for these things as opposed to after the fact where you're putting a fire out. I, fortunately, in my career, had a situation where I actually put in for a chiller, and it was actually for the pump in the main building. Was denied that same year. Ended up going bad. We had to get a unit on a flatbed to run City Hall. That wasn't a great time to say I told you so. I never said that, but I did say, hey, we did put it in for the budget last year. Maybe next year we can change the other engine for the building. So anyway, just like I said, in order to make sound-based decisions as it comes to a budgetary perspective and make you that smart city, you have to track this information. And life cycle cost is probably one of the bigger ones. Cities are always growing. Most cities are growing and expanding, either through capital improvements. You have different projects going on. You have parks. You might have a playground that's being installed in a park. How much have you spent to keep that playground safe? It might make sense to buy a new playground. Depending on the playground, anywhere upwards from $150,000 to $250,000. So how do you justify that? How do you show, hey, listen, how much we've been spending to repair this old one, and the potential risk if we don't repair it? So definitely life cycle, asset management life cycle is a major component as related to smart cities. And let's talk about your return on investment with smart technology. What kind of ROI should you anticipate? And is it worth the investment? I mean, we spoke about it earlier. Cost savings, streamline operations, avoid downtime or mitigate downtime, and you're making database decisions. Time saved with automation and predictive analytics. From a fleet perspective to a facility perspective, you can almost start timing at what year you start having the issues. Automated side loaders, agencies that I've worked for, 5 years was the sweet spot. After 5 years, you can just see how the maintenance costs exponentially start increasing. And if you're in the public sector, I mean, we work for the public. We're at the whim of the public. How are you keeping that citizen satisfaction, ensuring you have these services in place? And this is where technology, interconnected with the right mindset, makes you a smart city. And spoke a lot about EAM and asset management. That's the tool. That's the conduit to help make you a smart city and interconnected. more importantly, I'd almost argue you have to have that data culture. You create a culture where everyone knows what their role is in the organizational mission. I've always liked to tell my team members, we're business partners. If I fail, you fail. If you fail, I fail. We're in this together. And definitely involve your stakeholders. You need the finance department's help. You need procurement's help. You need executive management help. And more importantly, you need the citizens' help. The more information you can save, the more you can tell people, hey, we plan on doing this particular thing. How do you feel about it? People then have a buy-in, and that's explaining your why. And even in situations where you cannot, you might disagree with someone, at least they understand why. Maybe they don't agree with your decision-making process or what's going to happen. At least they understand why. I remember putting sidewalks in communities, and the people on that street weren't the happiest because to a certain extent, they were losing part of their driveway, perceived. They were losing part of their front yard, but in all actuality, that property was owned by the city. It was the right-of-way. And as upset as some of those residents were, they knew we were putting in sidewalks. And why were we putting in sidewalks? Because there was a school and kids were walking on the street. So, of course, you'll have some people that just, are upset about it. But at the end of the day, they understood the why. We're trying to keep children safe and not have them on the street. And those are just some snippets on how you can use data and build that culture for a smart city. I wanted to make sure I went through all the topics and leave time for any questions or comments regarding the matter. So thank you guys, and thank you guys for having me.
Thank you so much for that. And yes, we do have a few questions for you to answer, so everybody hang on, and we'll get right into it. So the first one that we have for you is, how do you engage stakeholders to gain their support and drive smart city initiatives forward?
Great question. I typically don't, I'm big into relationships. I think meeting with people with no agenda is good to get to know the person and build that trust and build a relationship. So I think that's step one. And then step number two, that's more the informal approach. And then the formal approach. Have your quarterly meetings and let them know what your metrics are trending. I don't like surprises. I don't even like surprise birthday parties. So why surprise people and say, hey, look, at the end of the year, you're over budget by, X percentage. You're far better off quarterly. Hey, listen, you're trending to go over budget. You might want to make some adjustments, as we get closer to the year. Or go into your executive team. Hey, listen, we're about to have an issue with this. Right now, it's okay, but it's starting to get into a kind of critical phase. We might to address it. So I think definitely just building that rapport, building that relationship, have those informal meetings and those formal meetings. I used to always meet with my customers quarterly to let them know, hey, this is kind of the standing of your account and how you're operating. If it's the fire department, look how much we spent on this fire station. We've noticed that the lighting needs to get upgraded. You might want to budget for that. So at least they know ahead of time before you need any kind of repairs.
Got it. Well, then our next question going off that is, how do you track and manage the progress of large scale projects to ensure success?
Yeah, definitely having meetings with everyone involved in the project. As I noted to earlier, having a right enterprise asset management system to track all facets of the project. So I'll talk about roads and streets, what's being paved, when is it being paved, how long do we anticipate for this project to be down, notifying everyone. Let's say there's a disruption of business. If it's a building that you are servicing the AC, you might be without AC for a while. Make sure the stakeholders know about it. If you're paving a street, that might affect businesses in the community or homes in the community. Have you relayed that information ahead of time? And it's definitely, for what helped me out was definitely making sure the input, my frontline staff was inputting all the data and the information into an enterprise asset management system. And also, that was a technology piece, but also conducting meetings, depending on the scope of the project, would determine the frequency of the meetings. They could be weekly, they could be bi-weekly, and kind of a status report. And what you get from that information, I like to take complex concept and issues, try to turn them into layman's terms, and keep everyone abreast of the information. Going back to what I said earlier, playing offense, sharing information constantly.
Got it. Well, and then in addition, another question. So what methods have you found most effective in securing buy-in from frontline staff and then encouraging them to embrace new technology?
Oh, that's probably the hardest piece of all, because I can speak about what I want to track, how I'm going to track it, why I'm tracking it. I believe in the why. It's important to have your team believe in that why. Have them understand, hey, listen, you're not just a mechanic that works on cars and does PM services. You're actually a technician. You have technical abilities, and we need your information to track these assets to buy new vehicles. You have an impact. You might think you're just repairing a car or do a PM service, but you have a significant impact on whether or not I'm going to replace that vehicle in 3 or 5 years. Have them see that big picture. We've always heard that old story of a worker that's working and, hey, what are you doing? Oh, no, I'm just laying bricks down. The second guy goes, no, I'm just building a wall. And then the third guy might say, no, we're building a cathedral where people can come in and share with their family. It's about having that mindset and relaying that mindset to your team.
Gotcha. Well, that is all the time we have for questions right now. However, but again, as I mentioned before, if anybody who did have a question and we weren't able to answer it, we will be following up via email. So please keep an eye out for that. And we'll be answering those questions individually. So we just hope that you all enjoyed today's webinar. Again, I want to thank you, Mario and AssetWorks, for today's presentation. It was a pleasure having you on.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the opportunity.
And I also want to mention before we jump off that this webinar will be available on demand on the Government Fleet website at governmentfleet.com/webinars. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you all. Have a great day, and we hope to see you all soon.